Hello and welcome to the Onelife Book Club. We are on our third instalment for the book that we're currently on, The Power of Habit, which we've got here. We're really excited by this book. You probably have guessed that from watching the first two videos. But this video is going through kind of part 3 of the book, which is all about the habits of societies. And you'll know by now, this is the wonderful Ash Porter. Welcome, Ash.
Thanks, glad to be back.
We're very glad to have you. And we've just been discussing, there is so much, like all of the other parts, but especially in this part. I guess, Ash, what would be your one thing that you're kind of looking at this and saying, wow, we need to take hold of this as leaders?
Yeah, so I think like at the end when Duhigg really challenges us all by saying, you know, now you're aware of your habits. Now you're aware that societies have habits, organizations have habits, you have habits. Now you've got to do something about it. And he even uses the word responsibility. So I think I love that. But I think when it comes to the societies, this story he lays out of the start of the civil rights movement and Rosa Parks and the strong and weak ties which led to that. And so he says like a strong tie is like that of friendship. And so someone you know really well, and if something were to happen to them, you're going to act, you're going to naturally instinctively, because of that friendship, want to get involved and do something. And he says firstly, that is a habit in itself and a habit we have across society. And then second, those weaker ties are so like a friend of a friend or a work colleague you don't know that well, or for us, stuff that's shared on social media, like movements, things that happen, those are weak ties. And so back then, you know, weak ties would probably be less common, but now I feel like because of the power of social media, we have weak ties everywhere. We're seeing stuff happen constantly and being made aware of movements and things happening within our society. And I think what it's just made me think about as leaders, as people who want to lead and grow in leadership, I think we have a responsibility to society within that. We have firstly the responsibility to really nurture and model those strong ties, those friendships, and reacting habitually and making good habits in terms of like honoring our friends and being for them when they need us and that kind of stuff. But then also I think we have a responsibility in terms of our wider community, one, being at the forefront of forming communities, making sure we have those weak ties and we're known and recognized and that kind of stuff. But also I think there's a responsibility to act. The reason why the civil rights movement happened is because people started acting. They started, it wasn't like a thing that they just talked about. They did. They went out. Their habit was to react and go and boycott buses and go and protest and that kind of stuff. And I think the challenge for us right now in the 21st century is because of social media and because of globalization, we have a billion weak ties and we're seeing stuff everywhere. Yeah, I think we've probably lost a little bit the ability to act on it. And so our habit now is to share something on Instagram rather than to do anything about it. And so like some examples I thought of were, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement that like kicked off on a big scale last year, but it's still going on, you know, like so many of us were probably sharing stuff and like so just like heartbroken by it all. But what did we actually do? That would be my challenge. Or we talk about the environment. We're so keen on sharing. We need to save our planet. So much is going on. But what are we actually doing? Do we actually have a habit related to our weak ties in place that means I'm taking an action or I'm going to make habits that affect that cause in our society? And so I think that's what I've kind of taken away for us as leaders, that we have a responsibility not only to ourselves, not only to our organizations, but to our society to act and make habits that have a positive effect on a wider scale.
I love that. So actually taking our ties a little bit more seriously than we might, and actually not mistaking a share on Instagram or a like on Facebook for the same as actually a meaningful weak tie. Yeah. And something I was thinking about with that is someone mentioned to me the other day, you know, as leaders, we want to be in networks. And I think when I hear the word networking, for me, that's not a particularly good picture. I always think of, you know, slightly empty handshakes and trading business cards. And that's not really something I love. But actually, leaders who we think of someone like Rosa Parks. The book also talks about Martin Luther King, but actually they were in networks of like-minded people with these weak ties. But actually we know one name in that network, but actually it was really important that they were connected. And so actually, like you're saying, we need to be connected. We need to choose to embrace the weak ties as well and not see them as less meaningful. But you're so right, we can get overwhelmed with them as well, can't we?
Totally.
Yeah, I guess, would you have any advice for how to invest in weak ties without getting overwhelmed?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know. I'm a bit like you, so this is probably a weaker area of mine, but I think maybe just doing it with other people. I think that would be the immediate thing. Is actually it's so much easier to do something when you do it with others, and that's kind of what weak ties are. And so you'll have a weak tie, and like your friends, your family, your spouse, whoever, you'll be involved in that weak tie together. And so maybe it's the challenge of challenging each other to go and be involved and do something together. I think that's like my immediate thing. And it's easy for accountability to do it with other people. And when it comes to forming habits, whether it's on a big scale, small scale, accountability is key.
Love that. That's great advice. So yeah, that was the first thing I guess both of us really picked up on, this kind of weak ties and strong ties. And I think the other thing, another story that's told in this chapter about habits of societies, is about Saddleback Church, which you might have heard of. It's a really big church in the US, led by a pastor called Rick Warren. And he basically tells the story of Rick Warren planting this church, choosing to go somewhere. And he started the church, and eventually it got really big. And he actually had to take loads of time off because he was really struggling because it was overwhelming. And he realized he had to do church in a different way. It couldn't all be reliant on him. And so this idea was actually forming small groups, which all of us will be familiar with small groups. That's a normal part of church for us, especially if you're part of a bigger church. There's probably a real emphasis on small groups. And within the small groups, there was this emphasis on actually everyone who joined the church had to sign up to reading their Bible at least once a day, having a quiet time. They had to sign up to being part of a small group, and they had to sign up to tithe as well. And it was the implication of these habits, saying that actually everyone in this church is going to start having these habits. And what's going to happen is that they're going to start leading each other. They're going to lead each other in these habits. They're going to lead each other in their walk with God. And that means that actually the pastor has to do less. And for me, I think that looks a lot more like the church that Jesus talks about as well, where we're kind of leading each other and doing it together. It's a sense of family and the small as well being really important. And I just love that, this idea of, as leaders, we want to replicate other leaders. We want to raise up others. We want there to be a legacy that goes beyond us. We don't want it to be that everything that we did stops when we finish because actually we haven't raised anyone else up. So I guess for me, it's that question of how do we pass on habits to other people that mean that it'll help them? Maybe if you're leading, I don't know, in the church, maybe that looks like handing on tools for how do you read the Bible? How do you lead a Bible study? Maybe it looks like giving people tools on how do you lead a team actually in your football team? How do you do that really well? How do you give people tools on giving a presentation if that's what you're really good at to help other people and get raised up as well as leaders? I guess that's what we're really passionate about. But it was just amazing to see that in this book. And we usually use the word tools, but actually it's really habits that we're passing over to other people, isn't it? I just thought that was totally amazing.
And I think, again, that's like, it comes back to what you're saying, is that it's a responsibility still. Like, I think that's the key word, isn't it? Like, once you understand this, there's a responsibility. Like, as leaders, we have a responsibility to pass on the torch, to pass on what we know, to pass on what has been working for us. And that's exactly what we've been saying. So yeah, that's so good, Helen.
It's good. And I'm actually going to read out the quote that Ash mentioned earlier. I think we might have read it out in a different video, but I've written it down before we started talking about this. And I feel like it just sums up for us really well kind of what this book's been about and what our takeaway is. This is the quote just from the last chapter. It says, once you understand that habits can change, you have the freedom and the responsibility to make them. To remake them. I haven't even said that right. To remake them. That's what we're called to do. And actually, that's the story as well of following Jesus, isn't it? Actually, he points things out in our lives and he walks with us. We have the Holy Spirit to help us to change and to look more like him, which I just think is so beautiful that this is something that's actually woven into us anyway. So this is kind of our takeaways from the final part of the Power of Habit. Oh, the other thing we wanted to mention was the appendix. Ash, do you want to talk a little bit about what's in that?
Yeah, so the appendix is like right at the end after you've finished everything. And it's this little like few pages where, if I said this to Helen earlier, if I'm being really honest, you could get away with not reading the book and just reading the appendix if you wanted to know basically how to form or change habits. If you didn't want any of the extra information and that kind of stuff, you could just read this because it is so concise, but it's to the point. It tells you exactly step by step what do you need to do, one, to form a new habit, or to change an old habit. And I've used this in teaching before. I've used this in my own personal life. It's so easy and to the point. And yeah, we just recommend it. Like if the book has overwhelmed you at all, because books can be like, or if you've forgotten the first few chapters because it was so long ago you read it, just read the appendix again. Every time you want to form or change a habit, come back to this. We think it will be really, really useful.
100%. There's just so much in there, and it's just so clear and on point. So thank you so much for joining us for the final instalment of our book club on the Power of Habits. We have enjoyed this book so much, and we hope you have too. And there'll be a poll coming out in the next few days helping us decide what our next book will be. So do look out for that and make sure you vote. But we'll see you next time. Bye.